Hey, this is Greg from GMH Audio. I'm going to tell you about one of my latest gear acquisitions. The Behringer Autocom MDX1000 compressor. What it is, what it sounds like, how I modified it, and what it sounds like before and after that modification. This is going to be a bit of a nerdy video, so apologies if you're not a nerd like me. If you are, stay tuned. Maybe you'll get something out of this. So what is this thing? Behringer Autocom MDX1000. I was hanging out a few months ago with some gear nerd friends of mine, and one of them mentioned how they used to have one of these things, and it actually punched way above its weight, and mentioned if you ever see one going for cheap, you should pick it up because they're actually awesome. A couple weeks later, I saw one for $40, and I said, $40? What the hell? Let's see how it is. I was doing some research on this thing when I ordered it, and there's not a lot of information about this 1000 model in particular. There are rumors going around the internet that this is a clone of a DBX160. I will show you a comparison between that and my DBX160A later in the video, so we'll see if we think that's true. And when I was looking around, I also saw a thread of someone who modded theirs by adding output transformers. And it turns out there's actually sockets in this thing that you can put an output transformer right in, and all you have to do is snip a couple connections, solder in the output transformer, and that's the mod. The output transformers are Behringer OT1s. They're found in Behringer's active DI boxes. You can either get a active DI box and take the output transformer out, or I was actually able to find someone on reverb.com selling just a couple of these that I guess were taken out of some other unit for some project they did for cheaper than I could get two of them in something that I would just take apart for. So I ordered those, and when they showed up, opened this bad boy up and put them in. I'll show you some pictures of that process. Here is before, and you can see the spots where they would go. They just have some traces. And here's after. It was really as simple as that. It's perfectly slotted. They fit right in. Just soldered them up and it worked right away. So obviously I wanted to know if it was worth my time, money, and effort to do this mod. It was a fun DIY project. I like messing with modifying gear, doing like DIY builds, so that appealed to me. But how does it sound? I decided that I would record some samples of specific test signals before I modded it, and then after the mod, set it back up with the same settings, ran the same test signals through, and then I have something really easy I can compare. So I'm going to show you what I did and let you hear them for yourself. Here's my Pro Tool session where I tested the Autocom. I have my test signals up here. I have a bunch of different signals, and they repeat 5 times with different settings on the unit. And this is test. This is the unmodified unit. This is the modified unit. And here I have some stuff through the DB160, the DBX160, because it's supposedly a clone of that. I wanted to see how it actually compares. All right, let's show you what I actually got. First, I have some sine tones, and they get louder and louder. I'll show you why I did that in a second. Here we have some sine tones with a quiet and then a loud, and then it goes back to quiet, and that's so I can see the attack and release characteristics really clearly. Then we have some bass and drums from a project I'm working on right now. Here we have bass, kick, snare, and drum room, which is on a stereo track. Because this is a stereo compressor, I wanted to see how it worked on stereo material. So I ran all those through the original compressor, and then after I modified it, first in bypass, then with the knobs on vertical, none of the buttons in, which seemed to be reasonable settings for using this compressor, and it was really easy to recall, so I could do it exactly the same before and after and know that I was using the exact same settings. Here's the knobs all vertical with the auto button engaged. I also recorded the DBX with similar settings, matched to do the same amount of approximate gain reduction and volume. And here's the knobs all vertical with the soft knee engaged, and with the soft knee and the auto mode engaged, which I also did the DBX160 and used the over easy mode, which is the DBX's version of soft knee. I hit it pretty hard, probably 8 to 10 dB of gain reduction, so I can really see the kind of character that this compressor has. So why don't we see what that sounds like. Here is the raw bass with the knobs vertical, no buttons. Here is with the compressor before the modification. And after the modification. A couple notes. It was slightly louder with the output transformer added, so I had to take this track down 0.6 dB to match it up, because otherwise it's really easy to be fooled into just thinking it sounds better because it's slightly louder. But I do hear some extra warmth, especially in the low mids on this. Let's listen closely and try to pay attention to like a smooth, warm, low mid range. Just sounds a little fatter and warmer to me. Let's check that out on kick drum. So here's unmodified. So as I'm switching between this test, which is the unmodded version, and this mod track, hopefully you can hear the difference. It is pretty subtle, and this isn't a truly scientific test. It's not double blind, but what I'm noticing is a little bit more roundness in the modified version. Going back to the original version sounds a little sterile, a little thin in comparison, and it's easier for me to hear going from the modded version back to the original version. It feels like something's missing, even though when I go from the original version to the modded version, it's really subtle. So let's do that one more time. Listen especially to the kind of low end in the sustain. It feels like it sustains a little more, like it's a little rounder. It's the most obvious to me in these stereo room mics. Now, when I recorded these room mics, it already had compression going in. I was already smashing them pretty good. So this is a compressed signal, compressed even 8 dB more, so it really exaggerates things. Here's pre-mod. And post-mod. It really brings the room out a lot. There's a lot more sustain in that. It sounds as if there's more compression, but I think it's actually the saturation because the settings were exactly the same. Let's look at my little sine tones, and I'll show you why I did it like this. Hitting this sine wave here like this is a really simple way to see the attack time right here. So here we'll compare it to the DBX, and you can already see it's pretty different. And to me, when I first plugged it in, I did not think it really sounded like the DBX. I was a little skeptical very instantly of this claim that it's supposed to be a clone. You can see right here, the attack time is way shorter. It gets down to fully compressed a lot faster on this DBX than on the Autocoms. Let's actually hear the difference on some bass. So here is the original version of the Autocom. And here's the DBX. So to me, the DBX is a lot snappier. Pay attention to the pick attack. It sounds like the Autocom is smoother. It's kind of more leveling off everything. And the DBX is really adding extra attack to the sound. It's really adding some nice pick pluck. And that's what I usually would use the DBX for on bass, is to add that pluck sound, because it does that really well. Make it a little harder on the attack and more plunky. Now let's compare the modded version in with that too. I'd say the modded version even sounds smoother due to the extra saturation that the transformer adds. It is definitely a good sound, and I like it a lot, but it's not the DBX160 sound, at least not what my DBX160 sounds like. Let's do a similar thing. Let's look at the snare drum and see if we hear the differences there. In this case, I think the slower attack is really helping the Autocom. I actually prefer it to the DBX, because the DBX at high compression settings I feel like can kind of choke off drums, because it's really aggressive with how it enunciates the front end of the transient, whereas the Autocom is fattening up in a really nice way, especially with the mod. Let me show you the release times as well. I have a little bit of quieter stuff after this, and you can see the compressor letting go. So you can see it takes a lot longer for the Autocom in both versions to release and get back up to full volume around here, whereas the DBX gets up around here, and it actually has a different curve. This is more an exponential curve. It starts out a little quiet and then ramps up really quickly back to the original, whereas this is more linear and smooth, going from quiet to loud. So that is a difference not only in the speed, but in the curves of the attack. This is going to sound a lot more aggressive. That's going to enhance that plunky character even more. And this is going to lend itself to more of that smooth compression sound that's a little more transparent than the DBX. Anyway, thanks for sticking with me through this analytical kind of deep dive into a little bit of my process trying to compare this compressor and the modification. I'm really happy that I did this mod. It was a fun project, and I think it gave a sort of sterile, old school utility compressor some actual character that's, to me, holding its own with something of a studio staple like the DBX160 for $40, a little bit more money for the transformers, and a little bit of DIY elbow grease. I think that's well worth it.